friends, dragi prijatelji, dragi prijatelji, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, I am really honored by such an excellent attendance. And those who know me know that I like to speak frankly. I will not follow a tactic mood in Panevropa context. I will tell you what I think happened in Slovenia, or what is happening and what should happen. So thank you for coming, and I would like to begin by mentioning that one of our former colleagues who moved to Slovenia as ambassador a few years ago, he asked me after 1 year of his Slovenian experience the following. Alois, everything seems to be okay in Slovenia. The country is so nice, beautiful, people are nice, and so on. So everything looks well at the first look, but later I discovered something went wrong, but I was not able to discover the reason for that. Why Slovenia is so polarized? Could you explain me Slovenia, my friend asked me, and I tried to do that, and I will try to present here part of the answer I gave him. And he is not, or he has not been the only one asking the same question. I think that, so now I will move into my historic dimension, or the historic aspect of my education. I think that we should take into consideration that Slovenia is a country of the autochthon communist revolution. The communism was not imported to Slovenia from somewhere else. It was done during the Second World War by Slovenian communists, despite their experience in the Soviet Union. So they simply decided to use the moment to take over, and they did. And there is still a fact which is, I would say, which causes problems in Slovenia, that more people were killed by brothers' hand than by three occupators during the Second World War, and more people were killed after the war than during the war. These are the tragic facts from Slovenia. And this is, I mean, the main reason of our polarization. And we discovered, in the democratic time, more than 600 massive graves in a very small country, which has the same size as Israel does, 20,000 square kilometers and 60 massive graves. We were one of the biggest cemeteries of Europe after the Second World War, and that story also is still open, let's say so. But let's move to a better part of the story. Slovenia was considered a successful new democracy, sometimes the best candidate countries, good member of the EU, etc. When my government took over in 1990, the economic growth was -8. We were still in Yugoslavia at that time. In 3 years, we were able to achieve +3, and this lasted for 15 years. When we introduced our own currency, the monthly inflation rate in Yugoslavia was more than 23%. It's unimaginable, but this was the fact. And we reached 15% in the first year, and then less and less. And Slovenia was known as a good case, sometimes as an example. And not just friends do ask us what happened and why Slovenia landed in the crisis. Before answering the question, let's start 24 years ago. I have to mention that not only because of the fact that I see Baron Posselt here in our company today. It was Panevropa with Otto von Habsburg and with assistance of Baron Posselt, who 25 years ago arranged the opportunity for the first Slovenian to speak in the European Parliament, of course within the EPP parliamentary political group. And the speech of Dr. Francois Butcher, who later became the first democratically elected Speaker of the House of the Slovenian Parliament, was proclaimed by the then still governing Communist Party as a hostile act towards Slovenia. It was not that difficult to get status of the traitor of the nation at that time. And let's mention another introductory remark, which is not, it is not that known that Yugoslavia did not finish because of the New Democrats. Yugoslavia finished because of the communists who were not able to agree on the future of the country after Tito's death. They knew that the end was approaching, and they rediscovered the national idea, the communists. And Slobodan Milosevic, first of all, who decided to abolish the relative autonomy of Kosovo and later Vojvodina, two autonomous provinces in the former Yugoslavia. And Slovenian communists decided to leave the last Congress of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, and they were applauded for that. I don't consider their decision a true democratic decision, but a decision against new unitarism and the idea of the Great Serbia. And then in April 1990, coalition demos composed of 6 democratic parties won the first democratic elections in Slovenia. And Christian Democrats, by surprise, succeeded to become the party of relative majority within the coalition. I never dreamed that I will or I should become the Prime Minister, but because we agreed before that the winner will have the Prime Minister, I had to jump into that water at that time. And the main point of the political program of Demos was the establishing of the sovereign and democratic Slovenian state. That was the precondition for the European perspective of Slovenia. What we wished was just what other free European nations were already experiencing, freedom and democracy, and good company, I would say, in the then European community. But there was not much enthusiasm with our political objective in Europe and in the world. I could say the same for Croatia, our neighbor. Despite the fact, because we were sharing the similar objectives, both nations, Croatia and Slovenia, wished to get independence and democracy. And despite the fact that the Yugoslav Constitution from 1974 recognized the right of self-determination, even with the right of secession, this usually is not known. So, despite that, we had problems and lack of understanding. And I would say also that our political determination was underestimated. I will quote now, one more Slovenian declaration, the end of the quote, was the comment of the cabinet of the president of Yugoslav presidency, Boris Jovic, after my visit in Belgrade. I think that also Yugoslav army did underestimate our ability to defend ourselves when we were attacked at the very day of the proclamation of our independence. Things got changed after our successful defense and intervention of the then European community with Brioni Agreement. But let's turn now to the question of transition. I have to point out that democratic and sovereign Slovenia was not a project of the Communist Party. And we know that the communists always have to have the initiative. This is the terminology. So this project was a project of new democratic forces. And on the day of the election of the new government, the Yugoslav army took the majority of the weapons of the then Slovenian territorial defense, which was followed by a late response of the presidency of Slovenia in its role of the chief commander. Despite that, we prepared an effective defense. And we were inclusive enough, and we invited the opposition, the communists, in different parties of the communist origin, to cooperate while approaching the historic moment of the referendum on independence, which confirmed the idea of independent statehood with 90% of all Slovenian citizens. During the process of adopting new necessary laws, we were faced strong opposition, despite the very clear outcome of the referendum. There was a unity at the people's level, but not always at the political level. I will not go into details, which also could be very, very, very interesting. So I think that all political, or there is evidence that all political forces did not believe in our success, and they counted on Plan B. The prerequisite that our government will fail at reaching the historic goal did not become reality. We won the war for Slovenia, and we were able to get international recognition 6 months after proclaiming independence. Again, I have to say that Panevropa, European Democrat Union, European People's Party, people like Helmut Kohl, Wilfried Martens, many other people, Jacques Santer as well, Mr. Lugers, Otto von Habsburg, and so on. So many Christian democratic friends, many members of Pan-Europa didn't have any problems to understand our will or to support our will for democracy and sovereignty. So European Community recognized Slovenia in the middle of January 1992. We can say we completed with that, with international recognition, the external political front, and the time was there to do more at the internal front. And then the change came. This was an appropriate moment for all political forces to take over. In order to prevent further democratic reforms, the law on privatization proposed by my government was blocked in the parliament by one of the 3 chambers where all political forces have majority. I have to explain this a little bit, because in your political matrix, I think there is no place for 3 chambers. But we have 3 chambers: political chamber, the chamber of communes, and the chamber of, I will translate this, of the so-called associated work. It's very difficult to understand, but this was the communist terminology. This means that in that chamber, the directors of the state-owned companies had the majority. There was the rule that at least 75% of the directors should be members of the Communist Party. I know that because by mistake, a letter with that content landed on my table once in one of my previous jobs. They blocked, you know, how the system of functioning. We were able to I would say, overvote them at the joint parliamentary sessions. But in case they didn't put the subject on the agenda, we were not able to have joint sessions. So they simply didn't put our proposal for privatization to the agenda. So they simply blocked us. So there was no way further. But when the composition of government was different, a new coalition decided on privatization law without any particular differences. No? And afterwards, a series of non-confident votes against the government was launched. I survived 2 of them, but not the 3rd one. So the left wing of Demos made a coalition with the parties of communist origin, and the First Democratic Slovenian government finished in 2 years, its 2 years work in May 1992. And what is important, that the new full mandate of spring government was possible only 12 years later. And so far, the parties of Slovenian Spring were in majority only 1/3 of the democratic time of Slovenia. This is also one of the reasons, I think, why we are here where we are. I have to admit that many reforms were introduced and large political unity was achieved in Slovenia under new leadership, and we were united as far as membership of Slovenia in the EU and NATO are concerned. We named that time as the time of unprincipled or mixed coalitions. Also, this technology is maybe not that we do. But what was important that the prevailing part of the parties with communist origin, I have to use this term, meant also that the reforming line of the Slovene government was not continued. And it is obvious today that despite both memberships in the EU and NATO, Slovenia didn't introduce fully functioning rule of law and social market economy. The consequence has been systemic corruption, what was admitted publicly also by our former president, who spoke once in the European Parliament. And the development of Slovenian economy depended first of all on circles of political, economic and ideological powers sharing the idea and practice of so-called economy of compromise. Again, we are in the old terminology. Some say economy of comrades or friendly economy. No? I think you understand what I wish to say. This means monopolies, cartels, illegal actions and so on. And the most damaging element of that economy of comrades was political or friendly banking. Our state-owned banks have been in troubles for years, while foreign banks have worked with profit also in the time of crisis. UniCredit from Italy never had such a profit than in 2012, in the crisis. So I think that in other terms we can say that we have seen the time of golden calf. The idea of ownership was stronger than the idea of good and responsible governance. Our bank gave many loans for unproductive purposes. They financed the ownership, power game, and we cannot say that Brussels was guilty for that. For the last 5 years, we have been facing consequences of lack of reforms. We didn't use nor the time of economic growth, neither time of crisis for necessary reforms. Now Slovenia has to act. Time for interpretations, studies, first steps, and so on, pointing fingers to the others is over. And there is only one way, and this means reforms. The extrapolation of the past, or the prolonging of the past, as I like to say, the Tito's nostalgia, new glorification of communism, I think are not the proper solutions. Now we speak a lot of about bad bank, and bad bank could be again very good bank for the chosen. No? And this is why the transparency in the banking sector and stress tests are so important. It is very important that Brussels institutions and ECB said we will insist to have insight into Slovenian state-owned banks, so they insist in transparency. And taxpayers are grateful for that because they don't like to pay the fourth rehabilitation of the Slovenian banks because they paid 3 already. I think that we also have to finish with a very high level of the state property. You will not believe that Slovenia for years has been the country with the highest share of the state-owned property, which usually is foundation for corruption. And I think, and I'm coming to the end, that we have to find the way to a basic national unity and finish with the polarization which was caused by the communist revolution almost 70 years ago. I believe in a different and better Slovenia. 20 years ago, we made it possible. We know that it is possible. And we also saw how Latvia succeeded to overcome the crisis under leadership of our colleague and friend Dombrovskis. We will succeed in case we will put the citizens and their dignity and common interest at the center of our attention and our action. Thank you very much, dear friends, for your attention.
Ja, Lojze, recht herzlichen Dank. Das war ein sehr ernüchternder Vortrag, aber ich glaube, ein sehr realistischer Vortrag, so wie wir es in Wahrheit lieben und der natürlich auch zu einer dementsprechenden Diskussion führen kann. Ich möchte vor allem auch die Kolleginnen und Kollegen aus dem Europäischen Parlament von Slowenien begrüßen und insbesondere auch die Botschafter, die heute hier sind, auch von Makedonien, wie Julien so recht bemerkt. Ich glaube, dass die Diskussion ist eröffnet und ich sehe noch keine Wortmeldung.